Today's event is focused on the challenge we face in society, the many challenges, and what the technologies might be to help mitigate these threats, these challenges. I should say from the get-go that technology is really not the answer to everything. And despite my background, it's really challenging because oftentimes, and particularly in some senses today, it's the problem. Now, I've been a computer programmer, a professor, a policymaker, a diplomat, and an entrepreneur. And my clear bias is that we have to look at technology through another lens, which is the society we live in, the world that we want to envision, and the path that we need to take to get there. So the first rule of thumb in any strategy is that you really better know the world you're operating in. And that's something that frankly is getting harder and harder to do no matter what we do and how we do it. And that's because the world is changing so much and so rapidly today. So let me start there. Indeed, there are two great drivers of change today. They are the environment and technology. And because both of these forces are converging, indeed, we too are changing. Now, in all seriousness, we are in a period of great instability and volatility. Both environmental change and technological change are occurring at such an unbelievable pace that humans are struggling to adapt to it, really struggling. Let me start with the environment. Our physical world is convulsing, contributing to social unrest on unprecedented levels and scale. It's threatening global stability, and we see across the globe ever more intensive and severe weather crises, greater and greater cost to society. We see habitats shrinking, ecosystems collapsing, obviously the CO2 and temperatures rising, and species dying out faster than historic rates. These physical changes, in turn, are not only weakening communities, causing death and destruction, but they're tearing at the social fabric of society by degrading food and water supplies, contributing to new health crises. No doubt that's why we're on video right now, and uprooting and dislocating large populations. Of all major disasters we experienced over the past 2 decades, fully 90% of them were a result of weather-related events. They have cost over $2 trillion in damages, over 600,000 lives lost, and over 4 billion people to be injured or displaced. They span every corner of the globe. And if you look at the records that are being set year after year, 13 of the 14 warmest years on record occurred in the 21st century, 7 on top of the top 10 costliest natural disasters, and hundreds of other record-setting events due to extreme weather have occurred since 2001. Let's look at a case in point in Syria. Between 2006 and 2010, Syria experienced the most severe drought ever recorded in an area known as the Greater Fertile Crescent. It was a drought that was exacerbated both by climate change and poor management by the Assad regime, to include ignoring severe overcrowding, poor infrastructure, deep unemployment, and rampant crime. The drought ended up perpetuating 3 problems. It caused massive agricultural failures and livestock mortality. It intensified existing water and food shortages, and led to the internal displacement of nearly 2 million rural inhabitants who sought refuge in urban areas, which were already in stress. This in turn put pressure on Syria's major cities, where the displaced relocated to, and contributed to additional social unrest, and contributed to precipitating the civil war. Subsequent to that, we have seen the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And let me just say, I understand as complex social phenomena, civil wars cannot be disaggregated into single causes, but be clear, there are compelling studies to show the impact of climate in propelling this crisis. This slide shows that even distance crises can very well hit home. If you look at the map on the bottom right, all but 5 states in the United States took in Syrian refugees. At a time when this was occurring, America was struggling to regain its economic footing. City budgets were tight, and this put pressure on communities who took them in and contributed to public sentiments on the top there on immigration. You see here also on the bottom left that indeed in 2017, US closed its doors to refugees. The second driver is technology. Even as nations around the world have signed on to the Paris Accords to initiate the beginning for healing the significant collateral damage of the Industrial Revolution, the explosion of technology, of iPhones, of Wi-Fi, 5G, streaming videos, bots, AI, and the like, and diffusing of that technology across all aspects of life represent a new proliferation, digital emissions, that with the promise of smart devices, with the promise of smart cities and the Internet of Things, will both animate and frankly threaten the emerging digital age and our way of life. So what will help us to understand this transition that we're in between the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of the digital age? Moore's Law. Let me tell you a little bit about Moore's Law. The fact is that physical, technological, economic, and social forces driving change today are all on steroids, turbocharged by increased global mobility, social connectivity, and connected devices. All of these are operating under the tyranny of Moore's Law. What is Moore's Law? As many of you know, it's the regular exponential growth in the number of transistors on a microcircuit. It's the doubling of performance of computers every 18 to 24 months. So that means faster processing, better speed, more memory, all of these things that allow for computers to double the speed of all the things that we're doing. Reduce the speed, actually increase the speed, reduce the time. And what's truly remarkable today and problematic is that the penetration and pervasiveness of computing and information technologies in all of our lives, across everything we do, is moving faster than ever because of this. With the rise of connected devices, the connection to smart cities, and the Internet of Things, we are seeing exponential growth in computing and in social change. Accordingly, you've seen in the last 2 decades, 50 billion devices that have been connected up to the Internet. That will double and double and double again, according to Moore's Law, as more and more devices come online. Indeed, let me just show you the two forces in play. I've overlaid the global temperature, the environmental exponential change, side by side the exponential growth in IoT and IoT computing capability. These are the forces of change we are facing today. Indeed, over the past decade, societal pressures to include rapid urbanization, failing infrastructures, climate change, fiscal constraints, all of these have placed significant demands on cities to provide services that can do more, save more, but cost less. As a result, cities across the globe have turned to the adoption of smart digital technologies, integrated sensors, controls, cloud computing enhanced by data analytics to provide intelligence and automation that can make cities and communities smarter, more efficient, more sustainable, more resilient. And we'll see, obviously, a number of these technologies later today. Today, building smart cities has become a strategic imperative and operational necessity for municipalities. If you want to compete for residents, talent, jobs, you got to get smart. If you want to address carbon emissions, safety, economic challenges, reduce costs, you got to get smart. We find ourselves, in fact, entering an unprecedented new era of ubiquitous connectivity, a world in which all people and things can be connected to one another, each other, from anywhere to anywhere on planet Earth and beyond, as we saw yesterday with the Mars Ingenuity flight on the planet Mars. As the internet has given voice to the voiceless across the world, empowering individuals to be connected and readily heard on a global stage, to motivate change, such as the Arab Spring, the next and emerging version of the Internet of Things promises to make visible the invisible. And by that, I mean, it gives individuals and organizations more insights into an ability to remotely understand and control the minutiae and macro dynamics of everything we do in our lives. Unfortunately, all that interconnectivity now being built into every facet of our lives has become not only a strength and a necessity, but of a vulnerability. The vast amount of connections, as you know, of businesses, manufacturing, city services, banking, transportation, election systems, all sorts of critical infrastructure. They form the backbone of today's global society, but these very connections also create high-speed pathways to the world's most valuable information and assets. And the problem is, these cyber pathways are not only facilitating businesses and people direct and instantaneous communications and connectivity to anyone and anywhere, but they're creating a direct route and potentially open doorway for malicious actors as well. Every time you connect to the internet, the world connects to you, and every malicious actor has access to you. So we see this. We're seeing this with cyber threats that have exponentially grown, exponentially increased, expanding globally in frequency, scale, and severity. In fact, if you look at email attacks, which rely on little more than a carefully composed spear phishing campaign or email that then injects malware into your computer system, this is the weapon of choice by every type of attacker, from state-sponsored groups to criminals to gangs. And I suspect there's probably not a person among us who hasn't had a spear phishing campaign on ourselves. It turns out we've seen the highest rate of spear phishing in the last 5 years. Millions and millions of people attacked, and it's caused over $3 billion in losses in the past couple of years. Similarly, in the past few years, we've seen the largest credit card breach in history, other records, largest computer worm in history, the largest denial of service attack in history, the largest ransomware attack ever, and the largest illicit transfer of wealth. Does this sound familiar? Breaking the records in cyberspace, just like we're breaking the records in the environment. And the city that's hosting the conference, Atlanta, is all too familiar with cyber attacks, as 3 years ago, it was the victim of the largest successful breach of security for a major American city by ransomware at the time. Worse now, on the operational side, we see attacks, Stuxnet, Saudi Aramco, German steel mill, the Ukrainian electric grid, and recent cyber attacks at water treatment facilities in Florida and two in Israel have shown that cyber attacks on physical infrastructure are no longer a theoretical concern. They're feasible, they're dangerous, they're costly, and they're attacking the day-to-day operations of society. Given this, as computers are integrated into more and more of society and mediate every aspect of our lives, and given Moore's law, no doubt these problems are about to accelerate even and ever more. So what's the role of law enforcement in all this? What can public law enforcement officials do? To be candid, clear roles and responsibilities on cybercrime have not been fully adjudicated, not at the federal level in the United States or local level. But let me offer 5 possible directions for local governments and police to consider. And I look forward to the chief's comments later this afternoon. First, to the law enforcement officials out there, potentially controversial, but shouldn't be. You should be the biggest advocates for addressing the climate crisis. When I worked in government, you know who the biggest supporter for expanding the State Department's budget was? It was the Department of Defense. Why? Because if diplomacy fails, it's going to cost a lot more to use the military assets than diplomats. Whether it's rescuing people in ever more frequent weather crises, or enforcing new public health ordinances, or keeping the peace when it's just too hot, law enforcement is the front line. Number two, cities need to establish a cyber governance structure. Cities and public administration were not born in the digital age. There is no one who owns cyberspace in local government, same on the federal side. That's changing, but it needs to change faster at the city level because that's the front line. It's cybersecurity, cyberspace, cyber attacks, all of these things are new, yes, although not so new anymore, and they pervade all that government's trying to do and law enforcement needs to do. Cities therefore need to adopt a formal governance structure with clear roles and responsibilities and processes that ensure that progress and protection pervade all aspects under the domain of city governance. Three, develop a cyber force. We need a cyber force. You heard earlier this morning of the C4I division capability in Israel. We do not have capability like that in the US, although some of it's being developed. But look, the FBI can't be everywhere. Cyber detectives are needed for investigating crimes with a nexus to computers and devices and gathering evidence. There is very, very few crimes anymore at all where there isn't a nexus to cyberspace, a digital fingerprint, a digital footprint. Local police can be force multipliers to the FBI, but they need to get on staff, develop capabilities, workforce training, and in fact, even to the point of establishing immersion capabilities in cyberspace. Four, government should institute cyber policy law and institutionalize those reviews in practice. What I mean by that is cities need to institutionalize a standard practice for consideration of safeguarding cyberspace in what they do. Just like every department does a budget review and they have accountants, every part of a city government needs to consider safeguarding cyberspace in the development of new policies, laws, regulation, new programs, or procurement actions. Because everything touches cyberspace and is mediated through it today, governments need to institute cyber policy law and practice. And fifth, to the point of the main theme of the day, yes, we do need to embrace technology to enhance public safety and community resilience. All of this in ways that protect people also need to ensure that we guarantee privacy and civil liberties too. You're probably familiar with the multitudes of new developments that are taking shape. You've got drones for suspect chases, drones for search and rescue and incident management, AI and machine learning for behavioral and predictive analysis. Let me just take a little bit of time to talk about some of the work I've been doing with DHS, or that DHS has been supporting. A number of years ago, we discovered in the United States that despite the fact that we had better codes for safety in buildings, we were seeing more and more casualties in buildings. In fact, over 10 years, that's been the rise in casualties in buildings has been going up. And the question is, what can we first responders do better to save lives and reduce casualties? DHS tried to procure that answer. They spec'd it. The answer they thought was, let's make buildings smarter. I'm going to talk to you about smart buildings. The question we have is, and that we've developed now, what if the buildings could be your assistant to first responders? What if the buildings could tell you where the hazards and threats are? What if they could geolocate occupants, blue force, potential culprits, the casualties? And what if you could get your dispatch 911 call, and as you're driving to the scene, well, not you, but your partner, you could walk through the site virtually en route after dispatch? That's what we have right here. mobile app and desktop apps that allow you to do all of that, to identify hazards, to go into a facility. In this case, this is the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., to go into a digital twin where you can virtually travel along the corridors, to look at hazards, to monitor and review the historical sensor data and hazard or other detection, to go on live stream cameras where you think there are additional information, and to predetermine your routes of entrance and your plan of action. That's what smart buildings can do right now. They can include things like real-time shot detection and shooter localization inside the building, which is geometrically, because of the physics of echo and things like that, hard to do, but we can do it today. To get that on your mobile device within 2 seconds of a shot fired, and to have real-time biohazard visualization, crowd safety, which is what we're doing and what we need to do today, so that we can get people back into facilities, to know where the dead spaces are, where there's not airflow, to know where there's hazards potentially for COVID transmission or other bio threats or things in the space. These digital twins can be the partners to first responders and law enforcement, and that capability is going forward today. So let me conclude. Our world is indeed not what it was 20 years ago. The sweeping changes that ushered in the 21st century neither reflect business as usual nor an established order. To the contrary, turmoil across so many spheres hint at a world in transition, a pivotal and historic time between two eras, the Industrial Revolution and the Digital Revolution. In the years ahead, we can well expect continued and more tumult, as entrenched establishments become unhinged, and as change increases ever faster. This will drive new and expand existing security challenges we face, and our ability to adapt and manage change and secure the future will increasingly rest on the tension of our ability to harness digital technology on the one hand, but also guard against threats seeking to exploit the same on the other. In particular, we must fortify law enforcement capabilities in cyberspace to prevent malicious actors seeking ever larger prizes as the whole world and everything in it comes online. And finally, as we enter this brave new world, we must also persevere as humans and machines become more and more intertwined, to preserve that human element and those relationships that we care and make us who we are today. I leave you with this clip from one of the leading robotics firms in the United States. You can't watch this without asking yourself if this is a glimpse of the future, and if what you see is better than what you yourself can do. Thank you.
Consider you not just a colleague, but a good friend. And so I think it's important that we kind of take we go back to where I had my trip to Israel with the Gilley delegation. And by the way, I am so thrilled about my relationship with Gilley that I continue to be associated with the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. I am presently on the board and have been a member of the board for the last at least 8 or 9 years, and I'm thankful for that relationship. Let's go back to where we were as a police department in the city of Atlanta back in 2007. I was fortunate enough to be appointed as the police deputy chief over support services division. And in that position, each division commander was and still remain responsible for the overall mission of any police department. And our mission within the Atlanta Police Department was to create a safer city at the same time in building relationships with our community. As you can imagine, during that time, we were challenged with resources, human resources, a number of police officers that we need to really deal with some of the challenges that we had, as well as how do we retain police officers, as well as technology void. I call our technology void was so great because of in that responsibility as support service division commander, being responsible for the budget was my responsibility as well. And we had a very shrinking budget to be able to invest in technology. And so that fast forward us to 2008 when I had a chance to go to Israel for the International Exchange Program. I had a chance to witness and view the CCTV network there in Israel. It was so amazing, not just that they had data at their fingertips to be able to make command decisions from, but for me, every inch, if you can imagine, of the state was under surveillance. It allowed the commanders to be able to make decisions from. And so having the responsibility of creating a safer city in Atlanta, I immediately came back and began to have a conversation with our then chief of police, Richard Pennington, about how we might expand then a very limited number of cameras that we had in downtown space. Robbie, I think we had about 18 cameras at the time. We were doing a very difficult job in trying to be able to make the city safe with our technology. And so what happened as we moved forward in this, we had a chance to, you can go to the next slide, Robbie, please. As we began to move forward with this proposed video integration center, we needed to have the ability to negotiate contracts with our private and public sector without having to go through legislation. Thus, we had a great relationship with the Atlanta Police Foundation, and they became the negotiator, if you will, or the propository for the contracts within the city of Atlanta. So the Video Integration Center was founded in 2007. After I came back from Israel, initially, we began to talk about the experiences and how we might be able to pull the various systems into one centralized location. That was done through what we call a PSIM, which allowed us to bring those various systems into one centralized location. We made three consistent points. As you see on the screen, we wanted to make sure that there was a blue light under each camera for the purpose of allowing people to understand that they were under surveillance. We did not want to be covert. We wanted to make sure that people understood that, and that particular camera represented an officer standing on an intersection, on a beat, if you will. And at the same time, being able to send data back to a central point to be able to know what was going on in real time. And then at the same time, push that information out as it came. A call, for instance, came in at this particular intersection. We would be able to once that call came into the CAD, which is the computer-aided dispatch location at 911, we would be able to then begin to triage that call from the time it came in, and then send that information out to the responding unit so that they are not going in blind on a situation that will occur. If you would, Robbie, would you go to the next slide, please? One of the things that we did, we renamed the center to the Charlie Loudermilk Integration Center in 2012 after a $1 million donation by the Loudermilk family. And ultimately, it allowed us to be able to put the resources that we needed to be able to get these various different systems to be able to talk to each other. The VIC, the Video Integration Center, is in large operation. It's a part of a larger operation. It includes the public-private security cameras, license plate readers, as well as it also includes our ComNet. Our ComNet is a radio system where we allow private sector security companies to be on the dispatch system with the Atlanta Police Department. act as a force multiplier so that it allows us to be able to utilize the eyes and ears of those security officers that are working in the downtown space and throughout the city to help mitigate any challenges that we might have. For instance, it's a fact that within the city of Atlanta, for every sworn law enforcement officer, there are between 18 and 20 security officers that are deployed on a daily basis. And so ultimately that force multiplier has been tremendous in the way that we solve and eliminate crimes in our city. Next slide, please. Can you go to the, thank you. And so the VIC house a number of analysts. They receive information as it comes into the 911 center CAD. They begin to, as I said earlier, they begin to triage a call as it come in. For instance, if that call comes in on an aggravated assault call in downtown Atlanta, more than likely we would have that particular call on a video camera. That information is then sent over to next door to the VIC center, and the analysts began to triage that call, moving those cameras back. It automatically drive those cameras to the closest camera next to the location of the call, and then also push the cameras back 5 minutes prior to the call coming in so that the analyst will be able to look, triage that call, and then ultimately send that information to the responding unit. So this is all located within the 911 center, and the VIC center is literally next door. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of this center? We first of all know that once crime has occurred, we can utilize this data, the information that's coming in through the VIC to solve those crimes by looking back and understanding what has taken place. The video and the license plate readers allow us to really track a specific individual if there's a car that they are utilizing to commit a crime or track. We can utilize those cameras that we have to be able to do that and find out real time where they are moving from. That information can immediately be shared with the responding units as well as investigators. As you can imagine, throughout the entire nation, we are preparing for the results of the trial of the officer in Minnesota, and we will be utilizing these camera feeds in our command center as they are already stood up in the city of Atlanta, so that we can utilize these cameras as a force multiplier and not agitate, if you will, those protesters or the individuals that will be out on the streets. One of the things that we were able to do when I was the police chief, when Black Lives Matter first started the initiative of protesting and showing their desire to be heard, we realized right away that if we continue to show large forces of police, it's just simply agitated the group. And so we began to utilize our camera network to monitor, to track the group, so that we would not use the officers to irritate the group, if you will. So by having those cameras, it allowed us to, as a force multiplier, to be able to move our resources out of the protest area, at the same time have those units close by and not be there to agitate the group. Next slide, please. So by the numbers, if you will, the Atlanta Police Department, when we first thought about bringing this network together, we never had a desire to have more than 10% of the cameras that the city of Atlanta would be responsible for. So you got to understand, we were strapped financially, and the city is still strapped financially. One of the things that we had a chance to do when we began to stand this up, I had a chance to visit, as you heard earlier, to Israel to look at their network, to go to the MEC and look at London's network. And one of the biggest challenges that was facing both those cities, Chicago, who had a robust network, is that you couldn't keep, the technology couldn't keep up. Meaning the city could not afford to keep the technology up. And so we had no desire to be total responsible for all the finances associated with this network, thus the private and public sector network. So when Coca-Cola, for instance, upgrade their cameras on the outside of their building, that network of cameras is not at the response or the responsibility of the city of Atlanta, but at the same time, those cameras are now being shared in the Video Integration Center. The city of Atlanta presently owns between 1,500 and 1,600 cameras, with 501 of those being license plate readers. Now, there are another 11 to 12,000 private sector owned cameras. And what happens with that, we are not responsible for the backbone of those cameras, neither are we responsible for the upkeep of those cameras. And most importantly, we're not responsible and the repository of the data that's being captured on those cameras. We share that information only on a need-be basis. For instance, if we're looking for a red vehicle and the analytics on the system utilize those cameras that are on Coca-Cola, for instance, property, we can track that vehicle, but that information cannot be, we cannot provide that information through open records because we're not a repository of that data. Since the inception of this, the Video Integration Center, the Atlanta Police Foundation, through philanthropy, have spent more than $11.5 million on this investment. And they spend about $1.5 million annually to sustain this project. Next slide. So what's next? I am confident that this network will allow us to continue to grow first, to be able to reduce crime. One of the things that we have always witnessed, when there are a camera with a blue light illuminating from it, it has continued to drive crime down. We believe as we continue to grow this network, our crime in the city of Atlanta will continue to be reduced. We are confident that over the next 10 months, the Atlanta Police Department, through the Atlanta Police Foundation, will add an additional 250 cameras in some of the most challenging neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. It would allow us to continue to reduce crime, solve crime as it occurs, and then also be able to, I believe, create a false multiplier because those cameras are there, and ultimately eliminate the number of officers that we need on the streets. Technology will never take the place of a human resource. I am confident that that will never take place. However, I do believe that technology is important in reducing the stress that we have on the human body, the officers that are working and providing security for our cities around our country. And I am extremely pleased with the direction that the Video Integration Center has continued to go in since my time as the Atlanta Police Department. When I began my duties as the Senior Vice President of the Atlanta Hawks, we did not have our exterior cameras integrated into the Video Integration Center. Obviously, that was one of the first things that I did because I know how tremendous of a partnership the private and public sector need to be. And so thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. If there's anything that I can do, Robbie, in the future, please don't hesitate.